In South Carolina, this particular poll, Trump 58%, Nikki Haley 35%, and 7% undecided. And when I saw that, I'm thinking, okay, this is obviously Nikki Haley's home state. Now, I don't know if it's her best shot because we're still in the South. I think Nikki Haley probably will do better in states that are more true purple states. But I guess this gets back to the wish casting of me from a sporting event just wanting it to be closer. Like
Yes,
when you
just
sent me that
please.
article, I'm thinking, okay, is it 5 points? It's 8. Okay, it's 23, which means maybe could it get down to, I don't know, 18, but it's still pretty far off.
Yeah, it's her home state. She's had weeks to campaign. She's spending a lot of money. She's still getting a ton of donations from big donors, so it's not like she's running out of money. But yeah, if she hasn't closed, we'll see what the final margin is in a few days. I think anything in that range, 20 plus, just further cements what we already pretty much know, which is this is over. The sliver of hope would be that she only loses by single digits, right? And then people will be like, maybe because you have Super Tuesday coming up. You do have some of those states that are open. Like South Carolina is an open primary, which means independents and Democrats can vote in the Republican primaries as long as they haven't already voted in the Democrats, because the Democrats already had their South Carolina primary. So you can't vote in both. But if you didn't vote in the Democratic one a few weeks ago, you can for the Republican side. So we'll see. 98% this is over, and South Carolina will just confirm that. But the person in me who just wants to see something close and competitive and interesting is rooting for that. Also, the person in me who thinks that Nikki Haley would be a far superior nominee to Donald Trump, not just because I think she'd be a much better president than Trump, but also because I think if you were looking at it from the Republican side, the evidence just continues to mount, in my opinion, that she will be the better nominee with a lot less baggage. But I think the thing to watch with Haley, because I was watching her on Sunday, she did an interview on ABC's Sunday program this week with George Stephanopoulos, and they asked her, will you still support Donald Trump if he's the nominee? Because if you remember, in order to participate in the Republican debates, you literally had to sign a pledge that you would support the nominee. And when Haley's been asked about it before, she's been like, well, I don't think he should be president. I'm running against him. But at the end of the day, she would grudgingly admit, yes, I'll support him. She did not say that this time. She declined to say it. She did the usual, I don't think he should be president. That's why I'm not running against him. But when pressed, she would not say it. That is a change. And that's something to, watch out for. Because here's the thing. Assuming she has enough money, which it looks like she will, because that's often why candidates drop out, almost always, because they run out of money. She, it appears, has enough wealthy donors behind her that's not going to be an issue. She's going to collect a lot of delegates, not as many as Trump. Trump's going to have the majority, but she will have some delegates to go to the convention with. More than anybody else except Trump. Trump's old. He could be facing prison time by the time we get to the convention. So my point is, there's not really a lot of downside to just hanging in, competing hard, going to the convention and seeing what happens. Now, again, is that likely that they would turn to somebody else? No. But if Trump's facing a prison sentence and he's down by 10 or 15 points, when you get to the convention, the other thing to watch with Haley is there was an item last week that happened after we recorded, and it didn't get a ton of play because there was so much other news at the end of last week. But Joe Manchin, who's a Democratic senator from West Virginia, who's retiring from the Senate, he's long been rumored to be, and he's openly flirted with running for president as a third-party candidate under the No Labels banner. He announced Friday that he is not going to do that, that he will not be the candidate. No Labels is continuing to work to try to get on the ballot, and they've done it in 8 or 10 states so far. The deadlines are coming up later. If they can get on the ballot, it's not going to be Manchin, but that doesn't mean they won't run someone. They said they're looking for a unity ticket, a Republican and Democrat to come together. Maybe Haley is keeping her options open for that as well. Now that Manchin, everyone thought would be the person to lead that ticket if it was launched. But just because he's not going to do it doesn't mean they won't still try to get on the ballot. And maybe Haley is thinking, hey, if once Trump clinches the nomination, both Biden and Trump are incredibly unpopular. They're both really old. Americans say they want another option. maybe she figures she could run with a Democrat and a third party candidate. So she's got some options here that I'm sure that her not endorsing Trump, if he were to be the nominee, or not saying she would, I think shows you that her and her people are at least considering the possibility of how things could go crazy this year, or more crazy.
This is fascinating to me, and I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be my next question. With this no labels, which at first I think the thought was it was going to pull from Biden, especially if it's somebody like Joe Manchin, who here's another part of it, probably will be the last Democrat senator in West Virginia forever,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
yes.
the fact that he still won the last several years is a testament to him with that state being so red. But that to me is really interesting. As you said that, and I think this is also probably the sports fans in us just hoping for the chaos, but also not wanting Trump and Biden. Just think about if RFK Jr. is still in this thing, and then you were to add a Nikki Haley on a no labels ticket. You're starting to really carve away, I mean, big percentages. If we think that RFK Jr., we did a show a couple weeks ago. I think he was polling at 10, whatever it is. If he were to get more popular and he can push to 15, you would have to think somebody like Haley, maybe this never happens, but all of a sudden you could win the presidency with like a popular vote total in the 30s. I mean,
You
if you
could.
start to really play this out, I think that's really, really interesting. Do you think she would actually do that? Because she's pretty young. She wants to have a political future. I think it's pretty obvious if Haley ran, she's going to take a lot of votes from Trump. Is that fair to say? But I just wonder. I mean, do you think somebody like that could actually win this year? Like, I think in the scenario we're discussing, if you go 4, 8 years from now, I can see that person actually winning the presidency. I don't know if we're there yet, though.
I think a third party candidate this year could win more so than any time in recent memory, but it wouldn't have been Joe Manchin. And I say that begrudgingly because politically, Joe Manchin is basically where I am. Like, if he were running against Biden and Trump, I would be one of the 5% of people that would vote for Joe Manchin. But you need someone who has a much bigger profile, a much broader appeal, even somebody out of politics. Like, if The Rock were to run on no labels, could I see him winning? Yeah, I mean, I could, because Biden and Trump are both so unpopular. But you're right. It's fascinating. The thing to watch, though, with no labels and RFK as well, is you have to get on the ballot. RFK is, I saw the other day, I believe he's only met the threshold in 2 states so far. Now, he's got efforts everywhere, and each state has a different margin you have to hit of signatures. Some of them are fairly easy, some of them are really hard, and then you have to have them verified, and then there could be court challenges. So it is not a guarantee that RFK Jr. is going to be on the ballot in all the states, or even the most important states, and it's not a guarantee that no labels will be as well. But if no labels did get on, do I think that a no labels candidate could win a four-way race with Biden, Trump, and RFK? I do think it's possible. Now, would it be Haley? The other thing to remember about Haley, do I think she will do this at the end of the day? No, I don't. But the reason that is worth talking about is because I think Nikki Haley is smart enough to know that the Republican Party is moving away from her and her brand of conservatism. She's in the mold of George W. Bush, John McCain, Mitt Romney, the old school Republicans, not this new populist Republican brand under Donald Trump. And yes, she's done very well, and she'll end up finishing second. But part of the reason for that is because of Trump. If Trump weren't in the race, I don't know that she'd be able to beat Ron DeSantis, one on one. I think that the part she's second mainly because she appeals to that non-Trump side of the party, which is substantial, but is far from a majority, as we're seeing in these primaries, and we're going to continue to see in South Carolina and Super Tuesday. Which is why she's not going to win. And I think that's the way the party's trending. Now, does it stay that way post-Trump? I think so. I think to a large degree it will, even when Trump is no longer in the scene in 2028 or 2032. That's the way the party's going right now. And so if she sees the writing on the wall and thinks, yeah, I would like to be president, but it's going to be really hard for me to win the Republican nomination. Maybe my shot is to split the difference between Biden and Trump. And I can say to the, people who maybe lean to Biden, I can say, look, I'm much younger. I will still protect democracy. I'm more moderate than Trump is. And to the Trump people or to the Republicans, she already has some appeal there to moderate and Republican leaning voters who aren't hardcore in the Trump camp. So that's why I wouldn't completely rule it out. Normally, you would say this is ludicrous. This would never happen. Of course, why would she do this? Because she would essentially destroy her chances of ever being the Republican nominee in the future. And she's young. So that would be a hell of a gamble to take. But because of the reasons I laid out, I wouldn't completely rule it out, as crazy as it seems.
And that's where too, I think what Haley's trying to do politically, or really where she is, and maybe some of it is also just because we're always comparing her to Trump. I understand Nikki Haley's not perfect, but I do think she represents a middle ground that appeals to that old conservative wing you talked about, the Mitt Romneys, and to be honest with you, a lot of people in the middle, a lot of independents, and a lot of Democrats. So I think the biggest problem with our country, one of them, is the two-party system. I think we're breaking away from that. I think people are. People don't want to associate themselves. I'm just talking about voters as much as they used to. Hey, I'm a Democrat. Hey, I'm a Republican. The problem is, I do think we always talk about systems being rigged. It does feel like what you mentioned earlier. The fact that it's so difficult for RFK Jr. to get on these ballots in the states. I'm not saying you have to love RFK Jr. We can have the debate about him. I think he's pretty fascinating. I've watched a lot of podcasts with him. I'm not going to speak for everything he's ever said, but I think his messaging is very much to the middle. It's not divisive. What I'm saying though is, if this man who is polling at 10% or 15%, I truly believe if he got in a debate, he could push Ross Perot numbers. If it's that hard for him to get on the ballot, and look, he did get squeezed out by the Democrats. So that's the thing.
Absolutely.
I think if you asked voters, they would say yes. Give me a Nikki Haley in the middle. Give me an RFK Jr. who's not Trump or Biden, and let's have a four-way debate. Let's have four choices. It just doesn't happen because those other two choices, the machines, the
Yep.
money of Democrats and Republicans, they make it so hard for these other folks to actually win. But I think most voters are actually kind of already there. It just happens to be that once it gets to the election every November, they have to go R or D.
I totally agree, and it's one of the biggest flaws I think in our system. But the first thing you said about independence is absolutely true. If you look at polling, I don't have any of it in front of me, but I've seen some recently. The number of Republic people who identify as Republican and Democrat is staying fairly consistent, but the number of people who identify as independent, regardless of how they're registered to vote, but if you just ask them, are you Republican, Independent, or Democrat, the independent share is rising, and that's not a coincidence, as both of these parties have kind of moved more and more to their extremes in the Trump era. And I think there is a gap now in the middle. The problem is, though, there's no infrastructure for it because, as you pointed out, the two-party system dominates how hard it is to get on the ballot. And then even if you can get on the ballot, just the practical implications of being able to win, because we have, not to get too dorky in terms of political science, we have a first past the post system, which means that all you have to do is get more votes than everybody else and you win. There's no parliamentary systems, which is what they have in many other democracies. If you get 20% of the vote, you get 20% of the seats. But in our system, as long as if there were a four-way race and, each of them got about 20%, and in whatever state, Texas, Donald Trump got 25% of the vote, and that was the most, he would win all of those states' electoral votes, even with 25% of the vote, which is crazy to think about, but that's what would happen. And so I think it's bad for our politics to have the system we have. And systems don't fix everything. At the end of the day, it's still people and it's still the actions of individuals. But systems and incentives help. And I think in our political system right now, the way that it's structured, the way our two parties dominate everything, and as you said, squeeze people out in primaries and in other ways, it doesn't allow for the kind of robust debate. And I think the best fix to me, the simplest fix, and I think the thing that would change the incentives in a way that would actually make our democracy better is if we had ranked choice voting, which they have in Alaska now and a few other places. And so the way it works in Alaska is you have an open primary where you go to vote in the primary and everyone votes on the same list of candidates, Republican, Democrat, Independent. You pick who you want. There's 20 candidates, whatever the case may be. Whoever the four highest vote getters are, regardless of party, they advance to the general election. And so you had a situation like in the Alaska Senate race where Lisa Murkowski was able to win the Republican who was a moderate, even though she didn't get the most votes initially, because ranked choice voting, you vote for who you want and then you rank the others. And if somebody gets over 50%, they win. If not, the person with the lowest votes gets eliminated and their second choice is then allocated to the other people. So it's slightly confusing if you've never done it before, but it's not rocket science, right? Like people would figure it out after one or two elections, and there's a push to get this in more and more states. And I think that would be for House races, Senate races. I think that would be the single best fix for our democracy to make things better. It wouldn't eliminate hyper partisanship. You'd still have really liberal and really conservative people getting there, but it would incentivize people to try to appeal more to the middle. And now working that out on a presidential level is another step, because the presidential race is one of the few, is the only thing that we elect nationally. But the way our system's set up, as we talked about, it's run by the states. So you would have to have some type of like federal state combination where somehow a list of candidates was approved by and then that list of, let's say, I don't know, 20 or 25 candidates went to all the states and everybody voted for the same list. That would be really hard to do, but I think it would be amazing for our democracy. Like, could you imagine if you had in your primary, you weren't just voting for Nikki Haley or Donald Trump, or you weren't just voting for Joe Biden or Dean Phillips. You had all of them plus RFK and Cornel West and Jill Stein on one ballot, and you just picked who you wanted, and there were maybe 20 or 25 people, and then the top four advanced to the presidential race. I think that would be it would be revitalize, our democracy. I think it would make things better. It would change the incentives. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but even if you could get it in like half the states, it would be great.